What's going on, everybody? I hope you can all hear me. I wanted to hop on here and do a little live training by request about perfectionism. And this is something that we hear a lot of, and I think myself, I'm guilty of falling into the trap of perfectionism as well. So I'm going to give everybody just a little bit longer to hop on here. If you guys are watching this live, go ahead, hashtag live. If you are watching this on the replay, hashtag replay. So let's give it just a quick second here. Trying to see if there's a way for me to share my screen with you guys. If not, we're going to get creative here, and that's no problem. Let's see what it looks like for all of you guys. Can you guys see me? I guess that's the first question. And can you see my screen? I guess that's the second question. All right. Well, even if we can't get going here, no worries. So this little training here, like I was saying, it came by request. I was talking to somebody that I've helped out a lot in their golf game and in their self-development, and they had something come up last night. They were messaging me privately. I'll keep names confidential, but I said, rather than sharing this answer via text, let's just make a live training on it. And I wanted to talk about this as overcoming perfectionism. If you guys like what we're talking about, I put a link in the description how you can get into my private group. I do things like this all the time. And I also put in a link to my book. If you guys want to download that for free, I'm going to reference that a couple of times during this conversation. So feel free to grab all that stuff. I can't wait to see you guys in my private community. But to give you a taste of what it's like, this is something similar to what we do all the time. So overcoming perfectionism. How do you know that you are being a perfectionist? Well, it really comes down to that urge of things are never quite good enough. We're always looking for that next layer, that next level. And you might be thinking that's not a bad thing. And to a sense, it's not. But where perfectionism gets us in trouble is where, rather than just working on the pieces of the puzzle that we already do have and mastering the foundation, we always look for that next thing. We always think, oh, okay, well, I learned that thing. Now let's just go on to the next thing. That's perfectionism. In a sense, the other side of the spectrum is that we get so caught on the specific detail that we never quite keep going. Okay? So what I want you to do for all of you who are listening is, if you feel like you're the kind of person who is always moving on to the next thing, comment the number 1. If you feel like you're the kind of person who always gets stuck on the details and never moves on because you're not quite ready for that next step, comment number 2. And that way I kind of have a feel, and this can be interactive, and I know how to tailor the conversation to all of those of you who are watching. So the balance is somewhere in the middle, right? And so I'm a big believer that the secret to the universe is locked inside of paradoxes, where two ends of the spectrum are complete opposites. They can't both be true at the same time, yet they both need to be true at the same time in order to be effective. And this is where perfectionism comes in, because the error comes from, I always move on too quick, I never work on the basics, and the other side says I work so much on the basics that I never move on and learn new information. Now, in the context of where this conversation came from last night and what sparked this whole conversation in the first place is I was talking to a friend of mine who is a great golfer. And we had talked a few weeks ago, a few months ago, and at that point, this person was at the peak of their game. They were able to go out onto the golf course. They were really able to just kind of dive into the process. They'd lose themselves in that flow state. They'd play amazing golf. They were hitting amazing shots. Well, what started to happen is this person got caught up on the fact that they have some important tournaments coming up in the coming weeks. And because of that, they started working on their swing. They started seeing their swing coach. They started working on all these drills. They started developing all these new feels because they were under the impression that, well, if I just learn new things, I'll go ahead and make my swing better. But the problem was there was nothing wrong with it. So they were looking for a solution for something that wasn't broken, if you will. And so there was no need to fix it. Now, where we run into trouble with this, especially in the golf world, and I'm just going to pull this out because I don't think it's going to let me share my screen with you guys, but in my book, and like I said, I have a link to it in the description, I have a whole chapter on this, and there's an image, looks something like this, and it goes P, R, Let me just pull it up real quick for those of you that are watching, because I know you can't see my screen. No problem. Where did I put that there? It's going to be starting on page 43, chapter 8, the PRT speed model. So what are we talking about here? So golfers, this is really going to relate to you. At the end of the day, most of us golfers, we want to fix this up here, the transition phase of the model. We want to make our swing better. We want to hit the ball farther. We want to hit it straighter. And we think if we just keep working on our swing, that'll improve. But really, to make the swing better, we have to work on the foundation or the process underneath. First, we need to fix our positioning and then our rotation. What do I mean by that? Well, if we don't have good mobility of our body, if our body can't move the right way, I don't care how much you work on your swing, if that foundation isn't broad and stable, it's just going to crumble when you try to add layers on top of it. Once your mobility is on point, though, we need to work on the rotation aspect of it. Can you learn to move your body in a rotary capacity to add the speed and strength that you need to hit the ball farther? If not, you add new pieces and things crumble. So this is where we get into trouble in the perfectionism world, especially with all the golfers that I work on, is we're so focused on this top piece of changing our swing that we forget to just stick with the process of doing the simple things. Waking up in the morning, going through a simple mobility practice, going through some exercises to get you a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, and the swing will take care of itself. But if we're focused on the wrong pieces of the puzzle and we're always trying to move on to that next thing rather than doing the basics well, then we don't get anywhere. And then the other side of the coin is if we spend all of our time just laying that foundation, but we never develop those skills, we don't get anywhere as well. So this is where that paradox comes in. This is where that balance comes in, is we have to do both. We have to constantly, at the same time, focus on the basics, focus on the fundamentals, and add those layers of complexity as we go. And that's how we ultimately get to mastery. Now, the last piece I want to touch on, well, I have some of you here, is as we're working on creating this foundation, so in the perfectionism world that we're talking about, yes, we need to lay the foundation and we need to add the vertical height, and they need to happen simultaneously, broaden and heighten and broaden and heighten. But all of this is for naught if that foundation isn't sitting on something sturdy, which is diet, hydration, and sleep. If you're not eating good foods, if you're not drinking a lot of water, and if you're not getting sleep, it doesn't matter. I'm talking about this in the context of golf, but this applies to any of you out there. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just say you're trying to get a promotion in your job, right? And you're doing all the basics well, you're making all the calls, you're reaching out to the leads, you're sending off all the emails, and you're going and you're trying to make new connections within your organization and within your partner's organization. And so you're broadening the base and you're heightening it. You're doing everything right, but you're sacrificing your own health. You're not sleeping a lot. You're not eating the right foods because you're trying to work overtime, and you're not drinking a lot of water. Instead, you're going out and socializing, networking events, alcohol, all these things that will eventually crumble. It's not sustainable. So the big takeaways that I'm hoping everybody gets from this is that we have to have both sides of the spectrum going at all times. For those of you earlier that commented that you're a number one, you're somebody who's always moving on to the next thing, awesome. For those of you that commented number two, that you're always stuck on something without moving on, awesome. You need to be both at the same time. You need to broaden the base, you need to create the heightened structure, and you have to have that foundation of your health, wellness, and everything like that. So to come full circle, how do you overcome perfectionism? It's one thing to know in theory that this is what you need to do, broaden the base, add the height, but it comes down to doing the really simple things, that foundation, if you will. If your goal is to create a broad base and go as high as you can, and yet you can't wake up at the time that you say you want to wake up, if you can't drink the amount of water that you say you want to drink in the day, if you can't get enough sleep, you've kind of broken this agreement with yourself, and you try to make up for it in other ways. And that's where this perfectionism spiral comes from. However, if you follow the process that you've laid out for yourself, and you have key markers that take you along the way so that you know what you're supposed to do, and you can keep track of your progress and stay accountable, or have somebody keep you accountable, then as long as you're moving in that right direction, you can break free from that perfectionism, because you understand through that process it doesn't need to be perfect. I just need to check the boxes along the way and make sure that I'm going down this this progression, this order, if you will. So what I'd love to hear from all of you guys is, as you're listening to this, you're probably hearing examples of ways that you fall into the trap of perfectionism. I'd love for you to share. This is what we do over in my group. For those of you that aren't in it, click the link in the description. Join the group. I'd love to have you. It's a great community where we all support each other as we go through this kind of a journey. And what I'd love to hear is, where do you get stuck in that perfectionism trap, and how can the community, how can we all help you get unstuck? What's the process that you need to follow? If you have a process laid out and you can follow it, you can check your performance indicators along the way, and you can have people holding you accountable so that you can always move on to that next step, then you will overcome that trap of perfectionism. If you don't know where you're headed and you don't have a plan to get there, you're just going to make stuff up. You're not actually going to move the needle forward. You're just going to think, oh, I'm doing all this work, I'm doing all this work, I'm doing all this work, but you're not going anywhere because you don't know where that destination is. So it's really important to have a plan, have a purpose, have a why, have somebody holding you accountable along the way. So if you don't have that, come into the community. I'll help you have that. If you do have that already, keep doing what you're doing, and I appreciate your time being here. If you guys found this helpful, click the like, share it with somebody, leave a comment, let me know. That's the only way that I can make better content for you guys, is if you let me know what works for you guys and what you want to see more of. I appreciate your time. We're at the end of the day, Thursday here on the East Coast. We have a weekend coming. Get done what you need to get done to enjoy that weekend so you can sharpen the blade and keep going at it next week. I'll talk to you guys soon.